It's always so weird when it starts and there's nobody in here. What if nobody watches this one? Oh, look.
It's there,
Yay.
Cindy.
Okay. Some people are joining. Hey, everybody. Okay.
Yeah, you should.
All right, okay, here we go. We're just like burning some time while more people show up. Can everybody hear us? If someone wants to give us like a, yeah, we hear you,
I'm sure they do.
then that would be great. What?
It's just like the Instagram video thing. Everyone like waits forever for like everyone to. There's always that delay. It's awkward.
Okay, but look, nobody wrote, I can
Yep,
hear you.
there goes. There they
Yeah,
come.
okay. Okay, everybody, so today we want to talk about composting. We want to talk about composting because we feel like it's a very integral part of the gardening at home system, and we've noticed that people seem to get hung up on the technicality of it, making sure they're doing it right, and then they go online and they research it, and there's so much information, and all of the information a lot of it is contradictory because there's so many ways to compost, and also we're in the tropics, and that means that composting comes naturally to us because of the heat and the extended heat and humidity.
Mm-hmm. Like you can compost a car in the tropics. Like,
yeah, everything is constantly composting here, even things you don't want to be composting. And so if you are going to use some resources from, for example, the Northeast, they're going to make it seem like composting is very challenging because they have to go above and beyond to get the type of like heat and regular humidity that the pile needs, but we don't have to do that.
Well, I think also up north, like the winter just sort of like
it stops the whole
ceases
thing.
all bacteria or microbial activity and stuff. Well, not ceases it, but that's what we're doing here. We're
What? We're showing you we want to demystify composting in the tropics because it couldn't be easier. Like you couldn't live anywhere where composting is easier to get into. And a lot of people in Miami do have backyards. Like it's a very backyardy kind of town, and so we have the feeling that if you have a backyard, you should be composting. It's like mandatory, like politically, like we feel like it's
justice.
People's duty to compost stuff, especially if they have a yard, and also if you have a veggie garden. So if you have a veggie garden, composting is the back end of it, the part that isn't as cute and isn't like, look at this beautiful veggie that I pulled, but we want to make sure that people can see how important it is on the other side and as a complement to your garden, because once you have a veggie garden, you're going to have things like weeds, or spent plants. Like your bean plant stopped making you beans, now it's just a plant, it needs to come out. Where does it go? It'd be crazy to put it in the garbage. It has to go in your compost so that you can use it more again, like get 2 uses out of that plant. It made you food, now it's making your soil food, and it'll make you food again next season, just in a different way.
Yeah,
right.
We're using biology to break down the organic material that our life is filled with. Our life is filled with palm fronds, our life is filled with old vegetable scraps, our life is filled with cardboard, our life is filled with the neighbor's leaves. So all of those things are organic material. We're going to use biology that abounds here in South Florida to break it all down. And there's fungus, there's microbes, there's earthworms, there's even lizards play a role. We're inviting a whole bunch of biology into the yard. And
also, it's like there's already a bunch of biology in your yard, you know, and so you're using it in a new way, or you're inviting it to interact with itself in another way that you can obtain a yield from.
And then why are we doing it? We're doing it for a bunch of different reasons, like well, we don't want the material to go to waste. We don't want to send it to the landfill. We don't want to create, to global warming, which sending organic matter to the landfill does. We also, it's a really valuable material to put back into the garden. So once the compost breaks into what we call organic matter or humus, or basically something really small, fine particles of just broken down everything, it's an insane resource to put back into the garden because it fuels the biology in the garden and gives your plants this the food they need, the buffer they need, the community they need underground to really thrive.
Yeah.
And it holds water because of the fungal, the mycelium in there. It regulates the pH. There's cation, there's tons of minerals in the compost. So that's...
Yeah, I think I've noticed that a lot of people think compost is plant food. So they think, I'm gonna be gardening organically, so instead of using chemical nutrients, I have to make compost, and then the compost will be the organic nutrients. And that is half true, because compost does way more than just feed your plants. Like you can feed your plants granular organic fertilizer. That's a really key part of your system as well. But compost does other really important things. One of them being like a pH regulation. So, when you make a raised bed, you're creating like a new and slightly artificial system. And when you can add compost to it, like really decomposed compost that was made ideally by you or by someone else, like the compost that you buy, like Black Cow, the kind that they sell at Home Depot in a bag, that's not compost. That's
kind of
shredded material.
Yeah.
Nothing pooped that out.
Well, Black Cow was cow manure, but...
I know, but it just pooped out like shreds.
Yeah.
Okay, what I mean is, in order for something to be considered compost, a microbe that lives in the soil or a worm has to poop it out. Okay, so I want to define some things for you guys, which people use these two words really interchangeably when they don't know what they're talking about. And that's okay, because they're probably not talking about what we're talking about. But organic matter and organic material are two really different things. And they both live in your garden and they both live in nature. And so I think, like people will accidentally use the other one to talk about the other one a lot. But in gardening, the difference between organic material and organic matter is composting. Is there the amount that they have been broken down by a living organism.
Biology plus time.
Biology plus time. So organic material is something that is organic, and I mean that in like versus inorganic. So like a tree and like grass and palm fronds.
The materials before you compost them.
Yes, and peat moss and wood chips, those are all organic materials. An inorganic material is a rock, So a dead animal is organic material as well. Like what? It's like a thing that other biological things can consume and break down. Organic matter is the stuff that comes out once it's broken down. So like you have a mulch pile and you let it sit in your backyard for a long time, and then you pick it up and some pieces of mulch are still there, and then there's like black dots in between the mulch, which is what we have in our mulch pile. Those black dots, the mulch is organic material and the black dots are organic matter. And so what we're doing when we compost is we're actively and purposefully collecting organic material giving it the environment in which something alive will come and thrive in there and turn that material into matter for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk about how we compost.
Okay.
And there's a million ways to do it. I'm not saying we're doing it
Like
the only way, but
like the whole reason why we really want to talk to you about composting, especially in our backyard, is because, again, we're in the tropics. It's super humid, where there's no winter. It's really rainy, and a lot of us have the space to do this. So it's like the composting wild, wild west. You know, like we want to make sure that you guys come away from this feeling like you can compost, because there's just, it's like we're in the perfect environment for it. And so we want to show you how we do it, but it doesn't mean that that's how you have to do it at all. Like, people should use whatever material they have in abundance and not get hung up on, if you Google it, you can find like these charts that have these different layers of all this different material. And I think people think it's more like baking, especially once the internet starts telling you about like the ratios of carbon to nitrogen and green to brown, which I'll define those in a second. But it is not like baking. No, there are no rules. Like, there are very, very, very few rules. And the ratio of all of this stuff is like wildly varied and can be tweaked like crazy, just based on what you have available to you.
So, do you want to start with this?
What? You want to go to the
Well,
pile?
I just want to sort of talk
what,
about
how we compost. Sorry,
Yeah.
I interrupted you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
So
you're
we
good.
start in the kitchen.
Scoot into the...
Kitchen scraps should actually represent like a really small portion of your compost material, but everybody in their kitchen should be taking their food scraps and composting them. But I just want to make sure that you know that like the bulk of the material is not actually going to end up coming from the kitchen. For some people that maybe live in an apartment, the only thing you'll have is your kitchen scraps, and I don't think we're going to cover that today. And that's kind of difficult to just compost kitchen scraps.
I actually want to say that people that can't have their own compost pile should really consider taking their material to a community pile. There are more and more of those popping up all over Miami, like the Miami Beach Botanical Garden has one, and also when farmers markets come back online, all of the Urban Oasis project is made by Fertile Earth Foundation. All of the Urban Oasis farmers markets, they all take compost. Like, so you go to the market, you bring your compost, they have a bucket you can add to. And also up here in North Miami, we live in Biscayne Park. Right around the street corner from us, there's a community project called Finca Morada, and they have a public facing compost pile. And also one of our neighbors, I think she lives in the Shores, her Instagram name is Minima.Lena. She has a public facing compost pile as well that anyone can add to.
Okay.
Okay,
So moving on. Okay, so we have a little bin here. Should I just go get it? We have a little bin here.
Okay, so we compost. We compost a ton of stuff at our house.
Yeah, so we're basically starting in the kitchen here.
It's not just kitchen scraps. This, though, is where our kitchen scraps go.
We use this.
Coffee goes in
fancy.
here, and then everything. And it has a lid, and that's key for us because we live in an old house with jalousie windows, and so fruit flies come in. They're a problem.
So you have this.
And then we collect a lot of everything,
Paper
basically,
towels.
that's organic material can go in here. So like old clothing and rags can go in. All of our egg cartons, all of our cardboard from shipping goes in here. All of our paper towels, our sponges are the organic kind, and they go in here. We'll use bamboo toothbrushes, and when we're done, they go in here. Hair can go in here.
Okay, so a lot of things
Right,
from
a
the
lot of
house
stuff from the
can
house.
come out there, but
Cooked food.
But if you really want to make a lot of compost in like a good compost pile, the kitchen scraps and all that stuff from your house, that's sort of more just like
To divert your waste.
yeah, that's more that's just to be good. And there are a lot of cool minerals that come in your vegetables that go into the compost pile, so that is important. But a lot of that stuff is just water. So and what we really want in the compost is a lot of carbon. And we can't get enough carbon out of the house unless you're ordering Amazon every single day. And so we like to collect leaves and other get wood chips, and so those are also going to be a big building block on our
Wait, but
compost
I want to go back
pile.
to the kitchen because I was going to interrupt you to talk about putting cooked food in there, which Cindy's mentioning. You can't put cooked food in your compost, and you can't put meat. You know, so if
Well,
you're
you
making a
can.
dish, okay, but you got to bury it because
Yeah.
there's going to be a pest issue. We are very rogue composters,
Mm-hmm.
so we compost some stuff you're not supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're also okay with sharing our compost pile with the critters that form a community in our backyard, which is a totally personal thing. We can tell based on our relationship with other people's backyards and with, you know, how our Nextdoor app functions that a lot of people do not want any raccoons or squirrels or anything like that in their yard.
Lizards, flies.
And we share our yards with all of that stuff openly. We know that raccoons go through our compost, and we feel like it's a non-issue. For us, we have never seen them. They come.
It's better than them going through the trash, I feel like. Because they're either going to go through the neighbor's trash or they're just going to go get some, like, really nice mangoes out of our compost.
Or some
you know?
grubs, you know?
Yeah.
But if you are really sensitive about flies or animals, mammals, the mammals, basically, a mammal is going to smell your cooked food or your fatty, oily meats and your butters and stuff that are, if you put them in the compost, and they're going to come find them. They're not going to smell a broccoli stem in the same way. And so that's sort of the trade-off from putting things like we put fish. We're into fishing as a sustainable meat source that we can get ourselves. So we'll bury fish bones and guts in our compost, which is actually really, really good for plants.
But not on the top.
But yeah, we'll talk about burying stuff
Yeah,
too.
so, yeah, I think, should we go over there and look at the compost
Okay,
pile?
sure. I'm going to man the video and you're
Okay.
going to talk.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to take our little papers and stuff over here. This is our
Here, wait a sec, guys.
there's a cat.
Okay.
Yeah. Part of the system.
Yeah.
Cat is unfortunately part of our ecosystem here. So this is how we made our compost. It's really simple. I just took some rebar and hammered it into the ground and then put these old pallets that I found on the side of the road and basically made a three-sided structure. I like to have a three-sided structure just because I sometimes like to turn this pile and it's easier. But in general, Tiffany and I are really passive composters. We do not turn our piles a lot. You'll notice we have a banana planted next to this. There's some other bananas. Their roots are going to go in here and hopefully get a lot of the nutrients. So is the gumbo limbo, but so be it. So if a lot of these nutrients just end up running right through into the ground, we don't care. It went into our bananas. So we'll throw our paper in here. And earlier today there was a snake out here in the pile. I think the snake was trying to eat a lizard, and the lizards were eating the flies. So there's definitely a lot of life out here. There's nothing in here. Well, anyway. So if you put some fresh stuff on top, then it's good to also have some other things around. We have, Tiffany's actually sitting on a pile of mulch, but we have some mulch here. And I like to use this and you can use anything to cover up your compost, but basically you just go out here and add this. So all the kitchen scraps and the paper are gonna get covered with some mulch.
That's the key, by the way, to keeping this thing pest and insect free and making it so that it breaks down properly. Anytime that you put something with water in it, already still hydrated, which is what people mean when they're talking about composting and they say greens. So a lot of tutorials will say, you got to add greens and you got to add browns. If you add green, which is kitchen scraps, or dead plants but that are still green, alive with moisture in them, not dried out, or you add, whatever, anything that's still hydrated, you have to cover it with browns, or it will become a festering stink pile, which is what we have on our hands because we left it open so that we could show it to you guys. Chris, put more brown and I'm gonna get closer. Do you have more brown? Oh, look, here's some green. So we brought.
So this is green. Obviously, it's green.
Look, so that's dandelion greens that were covered with bugs, and we pulled them out of the garden.
And these are.
And then we've got
I
hay.
just swallowed a bug.
Ooh, Chris swallowed a bug. We've got hay here, which is a brown. That's really. I like to tell home gardeners, home composters to always have a bale of hay around, because if you just don't have other brown around, like if you don't have your own mulch pile that someone delivered, or you don't have a really leafy tree, you know, or you don't have a lot of cardboard, then hay is a really good solution. So, look, he put green, now he put a cap. Like, I like to use that vocabulary because I feel like people get it a little bit more like that. Like, now there's a cap of brown. What that's gonna do is it's gonna absorb a lot of the water from the green as it rots, aka breaks down, and it's gonna make it so that it doesn't just become like pure fruit flies. So right now our pile is like pure fruit flies because we left it uncovered for a day or two.
There's been a lot of
and
fruit
there's been a
going
lot
into
of
there.
fruit because we have a really big mango tree and it drops a lot of immature fruit and they go right into the pile.
Yeah, and there's a lot of nitrogen content in the green waste you're putting in there, and there's a lot of, and the microbes that are going to break down the carbon, which is in the brown waste, are going to need that nitrogen. So basically, and there's a lot going on there. There's fungus, there's other things, but those microbial communities will have more resources. They'll have the moisture and the nitrogen coming out of your green waste, your food scraps, and then they're going to be really breaking down that brown waste, which is a carbon, which is really the thing you need. If you get your greens and your browns balanced perfectly,
which is not necessary
and hard to do, your compost pile will get hot. And so a lot of people talk about when their compost pile gets hot, and that's achievable, but I think people get hung up on that, and it's I don't, in my opinion, because stuff decomposes here so fast anyway, it's not really necessary to get it hot.
Right. People in, let's say, New York are super focused on getting their piles hot during the summer months because that's all they have, right? And so they're buying these long thermometers, they're sticking them in their pile. You can do things like, I'm sure if you research, you'll learn about aerating your pile, which means you can stick a PVC tube with a bunch of holes into your pile and then like force air into it. All of that stuff, and turning your pile, all of that stuff, what it does is it accelerates the microbial life in the pile for a short amount of time. So it's like a booster, but you don't need to do it down here. And you can if you're trying to, let's say, speed compost, but we are not speed composting over here in this pile. We live in the tropics. This is an active pile. Oh, it's got, down at the bottom of it, there's finished compost.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty close. So I mean, this isn't like all the way done, but so you can see there's visible wood chips in it. There's some roly-polies. If I do find a wood chip, it's easy to kind of break up with my fingers. It starts to become friable. And then we can actually see a lot of frass or poop from a lot of these little arthropods that are living in here, like roly-polies and millipedes. And in my opinion...
Castings is another word that you might be familiar with. For poop.
Yeah, castings, sure. And I love all the little arthropods because they're really good at breaking down that woody compost into extremely valuable garden humus.
So yeah, look, this stuff that Chris is holding used to be like mangoes and banana peels and leaves.
Yeah, I mean, I can see some.
And now look at how small all the particles are.
This is some straw from the last time we put straw in there. The wood chips are breaking down fast.
One thing that I wanted to mention that Cindy brought up is that she has a a lot of people have dual or triple bins. So one key to using this in your garden, like let's say Chris and I wanted to make sure that we had access to this compost that's right in front of us for fall. What we would do is we would, quote, close this pile off at a certain point this summer, and all that means is we would stop using it. No more new stuff added to it, and we would start a pile, like let's say next to it. But a lot of people have systems where they have 3 piles all in a row, let's say, or 3 bins.
Yeah, and that's
And
much
then-
more functional for actually getting the compost into your garden.
Right, because a lot of people have this question for us, which is basically like, oh, how can I tell if it's done? And that's because what they're doing is they are, here, you want to come sit next to me?
Yeah.
What those people are doing is they're using one pile, and so just like our pile now, at the very bottom there's compost or there's stuff that looks like soil, and then on top of it there's like banana peels and whole cucumbers. And so yes, the banana peels and the whole cucumbers, they do not belong in our garden. Food that is, or just any material that is, again, not broken down yet, does not belong in your garden as a nutrient.
Yeah, I don't really like that idea. A lot of people like want to bury kitchen scraps right in the garden, and I think a lot of that is on the internet. And while sure it works, everything rots and breaks down, I don't really think that like it's appropriate here to be putting kitchen scraps directly into the garden. Just
Also,
for it just seems it's always like buggy and
yeah.
while I don't mind bugs, I don't kind of want like that much weirdness right in the garden.
I'll also say that that plants, okay, that when organic material is breaking down into organic matter, all of those microbes in the soil, they use available nitrogen for their biological processes. That's a little much for this class, but all you need to know is that while things are breaking down, nitrogen, which is your plant's main source of food, is being bound up by the things that are breaking it down. And so that's why when I do see a lot of people who are getting clever, adding a layer of mulch right under their garden bed and then like an inch of topsoil on top, and then they're like, oh, it's gonna break down in situ. How perfect is this? And the problem is, it's perfect if you're going to use it in a year. You know, that's the concept behind the lasagna gardening often, is that you'll build a compost pile in situ, meaning exactly where your garden is going to be, and then later when it's done composting, yes, it will be like a really nice garden. But also, compost is something that your garden is going to use right away. Do you want to talk about that? Like, explain that? Like, compost is not forever, is sort of what I mean. Like, you need to add compost from your pile to your garden right when you're going to plant it, because your plants will actually consume the material, and it will
disappear.
It will oxidize, aka disappear, and also it will run off with rain and stuff. So it's not like a forever thing in your garden. You're constantly adding new amounts of it, and I think that's another reason why people like a pile, is because I think in a protected pile it's more liable to stick around for a while. But for example, if we didn't use this pile that we have now, if we closed it off today, it would be 1/8 of the volume and ready to go by fall planting, let's say October. And if we didn't use it, it would be gone by February, wouldn't you say? Or maybe a little longer, but it would be gone.
Yeah.
The animals that live in it now would just use it.
It goes
Like,
a lot of
and
places. Some of it turns into biomass that's in the trees as it gets soaked up by the roots. A lot of it will actually oxidize and turn into carbon in the atmosphere. Actually, a lot of it will leave in little insects that fly away from it, or in the lizards that are consuming the insects. So it's going a lot of different places. But Tiffany's right. If you have a compost pile for long enough in Florida, eventually it'll just turn into sand.
It'll disappear. We've actually had compost piles disappear at the farm, because what we do is we buy horse bedding by the truckload, and we compost it, and we use it in our farm fields, and we also use it in our potting mix for our baby plants. And if we don't use the pile, it will just vanish, you know. So that's something to think about. Will you, Chris, why don't you show everybody? Okay, so look, that's kind of a lowdown on very chill pile composting. We add scraps as we can get them. We cover the green with brown to make sure that it doesn't become a crazy bug infestation. Also, if you add a layer of green, let's say grass clippings, and you just let them sit out in the sun, they turn into brown, right? If you want them to turn into a nitrogen source in your compost pile, then you have to cover them.
Which is a really good point. You'll also notice that we build our compost pile in the shade. You really don't want to put your compost in the sun.
Yeah.
It'll retain a lot more moisture, and every living thing that's in the compost needs that moisture. So there's no reason to dry it out. Also, if it's under a tree, it's going to get a little bit of leaf litter also, so that's nice. And the tree is probably going to be the one that's benefiting from it the most, which is
so yeah, our pile is very passive. We don't get hung up on how much brown, which is carbon, to green, which is nitrogen, we put in it. We basically put all of the green that we have available in our home and all of the brown available in our home in it, and then
we hoard some,
which is what I want Chris to show you next. Okay.
So
show them what you picked up on the streets of Biscayne Park today.
This is like my love and hate right here. A giant plastic bag full of leaves, because some neighbor put all these leaves, or their landscaper put all these leaves into a bag.
Don't get it, it's fine.
And
okay, so this thing weighs like 150 pounds. So Chris regrets it a little bit. Usually in Biscayne Park, okay, so we live in Biscayne Park. It's a lot of people with big yards. What we do is on a Sunday, while we're going about our normal lives, if we see a bag that is see-through and very fluffy looking, we'll often snag it from the side of the road, especially because we both have trucks, because it's likely full of leaves. If it's fluffy, you know?
The leaves are great.
Okay, and so then Chris, open up your present.
Yeah, so, I didn't know bags came this big. This is really impressive. So yeah, you get a bunch of yard waste that was going to go to the landfill, and we can add this to our garden or to our pile. I want to tell you real quick about my favorite type of compost pile, which is called like a leaf molder, and you don't really hear about it that much because it's kind of like 1960s composting. But what you do is you can actually just leave it in the bag, or you can get like a metal fencing, or you can use the pallet trick and just make a big pile of leaves that your neighbors were sending to the landfill, and they turn into really, really rich compost. Leaves come with so much biology on them already that they make really, really good compost, and they break down much faster than wood chips do, and so that's another reason I like them a lot. They turn into humus faster than almost anything else, and if you keep them moist and in a big pile, the faster they go.
Yeah, leaf litter is very valuable in the composting system. I kind of want to talk a little bit about like just our methods here. Chris and I very much believe that people should try and keep as much organic material on their property as possible. So for us, we keep everything. So we would never put a pile of like palm fronds and leaves and scraps and whatever on the road. So that's like a belief that we have, like a moral.
Justice.
Yes, okay. So then when we see neighbors doing it, we try to do our part to offset some of the stuff they're doing. We don't get hung up on, we do like a clear bag so that we can tell if there's anything a little wild in it. So for example, I have approached a bag before and then been like, oh, there's so much trash in this, microplastics in here, I don't want it, right? And I'll leave it.
Yeah.
But someone asked about if we think the leaves were sprayed, and we know enough about how landscapers operate that we don't think that that's an issue.
Yeah, they're black olive trees. I mean, even if they were sprayed, a lot of that stuff just goes into the groundwater and you can't really escape it anyway. So
that for us, it's like, for everyone, you have to make decisions based on, you know, some knowledge that you have, some educated guesses, and then what you're comfortable with. So for us, the possibility that a neighbor had a landscaper spray dead leaves while they were on the ground of their property isn't enough of a risk for us to stop taking people's compost, you know?
Yeah.
So
even if they had, like, the effects of it would be so low, and I mean there's so much in the air and everything around us that we're not gonna really get caught up in that.
right. So for example, I mean, you could also say that about cardboard boxes. Like, oh man, what processes are these cardboard boxes going through? A lot of the boxes that we use in the agricultural industry, they have glue on them. Where does the glue come from? What's it made out of? You know, we're making all of these decisions for ourselves, you know, just one by one, figuring out what's worth it to really worry about. We take compost from other places too when we can, but we also don't get really hung up on home composting. This is more like making sure that our yard doesn't contribute to the landfills, which all in our home, you know, as much as possible. So when yard waste goes to the landfill, it doesn't compost. You know, that's not how it works. That stuff just gets buried and becomes
fossil fuels.
And
it becomes carbon in the atmosphere.
Right. So it doesn't just. It's not like this really cool environmental composting thing that's happening here is happening on a larger scale at the dump. That is not happening. And also, when someone puts their trash, their yard trash in plastic like that, then the yard trash, ooh, it's gonna fall, let's watch. Then the yard trash collecting people can't take it. They can only take it when it's loose. So this is a double whammy here. Okay, Chris, show them this other composting, very passive composting that's going on here.
My second favorite compost method, I don't know, but this is, I think every good compost pile should have a banana next to it. This is again a really passive technique, and so you can see that we have these really happy banana plants are making tons of new leaves. They were planted like 5 months ago and they're already getting very big and this big around. And you'll notice there is some topography underneath them. And that topography is actually all stuff that we've piled up on them. They were leaves from the front yard. It was cardboard that that came from when we were doing produce. It's sticks. It's palm fronds. I love collecting palm fronds and burying them. And it's a little unsightly right now. And so what I'll do is I'll actually, you know, cover that cardboard eventually when I get around to it. But Tiffany comes a little closer. Right this way. Yeah. So I can. So these are. I just put some sticks from, you know, our avocado that fell. There's some egg crates, and all this stuff is just breaking down extremely quick. If we go a little bit deeper, we got some slugs and some worms and some more cardboard that's breaking down. Ooh, here I have some palm fronds down here. I'm starting to see lots of mycelium, like which is like the roots of fungus, basically, crawling on stuff. Just going down here. Okay, and finally I hit sand. And right under the sand, there is.
It's really hard to see because it's so sunny out.
Well, there's banana roots. You'll have to take me
roots are
words.
in there,
Yeah. So the banana
and look,
is feeding off all this material.
Chris, stand next to the banana so that people can see its scale. Because this banana is about 6 months old. Okay, we planted it as a 3-gallon potted banana like the ones that we sell at a nursery, and we've been piling up material under it ever since, and this is how big it is by now. So I'm not saying that that's so impressive, but this is how bananas should be growing. They
no
are
irrigation
they're
either.
really no irrigation. They're really heavy feeders. They need to have very messy piles under them at all times. They're constantly
to get bananas.
Yeah, so like if you have a banana plant and it doesn't look like this after 6 months, it's because of the environment that you're creating or not creating for it. So all of our bananas look like this. Like when they were babies, they had mulch almost up to their tippy tops, donutted around them. so that they could just start feeding off of it right away and compost, and so that it was composting for them, you know? So this is basically called sheet mulching, right? Like this is, if you were to Google this type of composting.
Banana mounding, if you wanna
or
make
banana
up something.
mounding, but like you can do this to all of the fruit trees.
Yeah, I wanna-
You know, like all fruit trees need, like, oh, here's our roselle. It's so embarrassing though. You're gonna show them that
No,
roselle?
I mean, I was just going to show them like another example of sheet
Okay.
mulching. So basically, I want to plant some stuff here, so I basically put down a layer of cardboard. Come here, maybe you can see this stuff under here.
Oh yeah, millipedes. We need to tell them about
And you can
millipedes.
see, look, you can see the mycelium
Oh yeah, look, mycelium.
that's starting to run
on our
through the cardboard.
Show them a millipede.
Oh, my favorite, my spirit animal. Wow,
Yeah.
look at the mycelium under there.
Ooh, that's fun.
So yeah, this, I just put this down a couple weeks ago.
Mycelium is really essential for the health of perennial plants in your garden, so
Here's
anything
a-
that lasts longer than a year. And look, a lot of people will send us pictures of
I made
millipedes
it
and
poop.
stuff and be like, what is this? Is it bad for my garden? Is it good? Millipedes are like tropical Miami native versions of like composting worms. So red wiggler types, they don't love it here. So they're not gonna thrive like a millipede will. And millipedes make castings, aka worm poop, as well, and they love making it in piles of mulch. So we have had people worry that millipedes are bad for their garden and are eating their plants, but millipedes are a really cool other category of bug called detritivores, right? Is that-
Detrivores?
I think it's
Wanna
detrivores
sit back down
or
in the shade?
detritivores, and what that means is that they only eat things that are already rotting. So if you have a plant, all right, go back to the thing. If you have a plant that's being attacked by millipedes, it's because that plant, even if you can't see it, that plant is basically already rotting. Like its cells are breaking down. Okay, we're gonna sit back down. Chris, take a seat.
Okay.
Okay, so that's our little tour.
So we got a few minutes left. Let's take some questions, because I think we got into the.
We have 7 minutes until Instagram Live kicks us off.
So
Cover cropping. So look,
Oh, you want to do cover crop?
well, no, look, I want to address cover cropping because we talk about it a lot for people who have raised beds. And what I want to say about it is cover cropping is basically this system that farms use to create new soil,
Build biomass.
and build biomass, and all it is that you're growing a plant on purpose so that what you can get out of that plant is just its material. It's biomass, it's organic material, while it's green or while it's brown, either. So if you're gonna cover crop, which we're gonna do like a whole video about cover cropping in I think 2 weeks, but the idea behind it is very simple and can be used for anything. So another term that's really similar is chop and drop. What it means is, let's say you buy a plant because it grows really quickly. So Mexican sunflower is a perfect example of the type of plant that people will plant for chop and drop. It grows super fast. It's actually a little invasive, like, so you have to kind of be ready to manage it. You take a machete and you chop it down into all these little pieces, and then you either lay it around a plant that you want, you know, like around your banana, or you add it to your compost pile, or you leave it there. So that's what cover cropping is.
It's growing compost.
We're growing compost, or we're growing material to compost, either in a pile or in your field if you have a farm, or in your raised bed if you have a garden. It's just the act of purposefully growing a plant so that you can use its biomass to build soil. And we feel like what we're doing in our yard by just making sure that we capture all the biomass that's being passively generated here is kind of like we're always cover cropping in our backyard. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like cover cropping is the purposeful, I'm gonna plant something just so that I can take its material and use it. And the way that we look at our backyard is like it's an abundant and constant and really passive source of material. And so we're gonna make sure that we use that too.
Like the psychology is like, think of how a forest or a meadow works. It's basically like a meadow is, growing a bunch of biomass, and then snow's coming, or it's raining, or becoming dry. All that stuff is breaking down in the soil. Forest, trees fall, leaves fall, things die and are born again. And so a cover crop is basically, instead of taking that plant energy away from the farm as food, you're just returning it back, and you're building the biology and the biomass of the soil at the same time. So let's jump into these questions now.
Okay, yeah. So look, one of the questions was like, what, I think people often want us to diagnose their compost's unique problems. If your compost doesn't seem right, like you've done some research and you feel like your compost is full of bugs, or it smells bad, or I feel like that's almost always water issues, too wet. If your compost pile is just like a bag of leaves, or it feels very crumbly, and you pick it up and nothing is changing, and it's really crispy and dry, then it's too dry. But usually here in the tropics, the issue that we run into time and time again with people's houses is it's too wet. And also
Anaerobic.
Yes, so anaerobic. So when someone says my compost smells, to me that's like anaerobic right away, which is the wrong kind of what is it? Anaerobic bacteria?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, so it's like the wrong kind of bacteria. We don't want anaerobic like breaking down or whatever. We want aerobic, so with oxygen instead of without oxygen. We also often run into compost tumbler, like closed systems in people's houses, especially people who have smaller yards or people who just have balconies. And those things are really, really, really hard to get the moisture content right on. We, in general, do not recommend people use them because they're so hard to get right. I feel like I've never opened a compost tumbler and seen like perfect compost in there. It's always too wet. And that's because there is something to be said about allowing nature to be really in charge of your pile. Like our pile has air coming into all four sides and moisture, and so we feel like it's regulating itself. Like we've never. And then also, if your pile would only get like too wet in nature if you were adding a crazy amount of the green manure,
or like too many, if you just like put like 30 like mango pits in there all at once, which we've done, you might get a little bit of a stink.
Right.
Or if you like threw a brick of cheese out there.
But we add a lot of brown,
Yeah.
like we're brown hoarders.
Okay,
and the brown is the way that you get also bulk, so it's like it's,
yeah. Cindy
okay.
says her tumbler's rocking. No,
Oh, well, Cindy also asked how much compost you need for a 4x8 foot raised bed. And so you have a number, or I have a number here in my, we have a building soil class that like nobody takes, but it's like my passion class, and I have its syllabus right here just in case I needed to refer to it. But like, there's a percentage of your soil which should be organic matter, and it's crazy low, right? It's like 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you look at your raised bed, which is 32 square feet, which is usually a cubic yard of organic material, so not compost, but rather organic stuff that your roots are being held in. And so, for example, our standard raised bed soil is like peat moss, coconut coir, pine bark, that kind of thing, and then like broken down wood chips. Only 5% of that needs to be compost, aka humus.
So yeah, I think the short answer to Tiffany's thing is you can put as much as you want. If you put too much, you're kind of just wasting it.
And it's gonna muck up your soil.
So you can actually put a tiny amount. If you put even just the tiniest amount of compost, you're going to be contributing a lot of biology to that soil. If you use a lot of compost, you're going to be really making a nice fertile area that's going to retain a lot of moisture and really help your plants out. If you put like gobs and gobs and gobs, and like you have like a foot thick layer of it,
that's not good because it's not natural.
It's not really helping you out at all, and it might hold too much moisture.
Yeah. One thing that we also like to point out about compost is that like one of the main things you're doing in that pile is you're encouraging all of this life. That's my timer, so we have 10 minutes left. You're encouraging all of this life that we cannot replicate or control in any easy way, you're breeding it like passively, you know? And so then when you go and you add that stuff to your garden, even if you're just adding like literally this much, you're inoculating your soil with all of that life. And if things go as planned and you water your garden regularly and you have roots in there, which they need to thrive and survive and multiply, then all of that soil life that you put in there that was in your compost will spread. So just like the word inoculating, you know, where you go and you take a little bit of something, like you're baking bread and there's like yeast. What are you doing?
I'm getting out of the sun.
So yeah, like you'll go and any small amount of it will inoculate your garden with all of that life, and that's like really critical.
There was a fun question. It was, how do you chop before you drop?
Oh yeah, so you can chop anyway. Like we like machetes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and basically, to answer that question, the smaller of pieces you break things down into, the faster they'll compost.
Oh yeah.
But
yeah.
at the same time, I'll put whole palm fronds like under my bananas because I'm not going to sit out there and chop up a bunch of palm fronds. I'm just going to like put them under the bananas, bury them in some mulch that I have, or bury them in some leaves and let them go.
Yeah, we're very passive. But if someone was trying to be like really time crunchy, ambitious about their pile, you can like even take the stuff from your kitchen and like put it in a blender, but I would never say to do that. Like you do not need to do that at all, but the smaller your pieces are, then the faster they'll break down. But if we are...
That makes me think of the freezing trick.
What?
Oh, putting your kitchen scraps in a bag in the freezer, which is a really good way to not have fruit flies in the kitchen, and it will also, when you thaw that stuff out and actually add it to your pile, it'll break down like even super fast.
Oh, you have a roly-poly on you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so like if you're gonna chop and drop, all you need to do, you can be really rough, like you're on like an adventure in the forest or something. You can just like chop, just pull everything down. Like we will
You
use
get
machetes.
to be the artist.
We'll use machetes and we'll go like Z, you know, and like cut it down.
Like
But you have to have a
Zorro.
really sharp machete. You gotta sharpen it. They don't sell them sharpened. You gotta get into it. And then, but also when we cover crop, let's say, like in a raised bed, we'll show you next week some of our techniques for killing those plants. Crimping is basically just like pushing the plants down. So some farms have crimpers that are like rollers that go behind their tractors, and what they do is they just run over the plants and the ball will just like, you know, flatten it.
See,
but I'm saying you
you
can do that with your feet, you know, like you can just like stomp around on your stuff and break it, and then it'll become flat and dead, and then you can just leave that around your plants. And also, I really want to encourage people to not just use kitchen scraps, because I think that that's a real focus. Because there are things that you can buy that are like kitchen scraps, blah, 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 but it's way more about all of the other stuff on your property, diverting all of that stuff from the waste stream. And someone was like, I use my kitchen scraps for broth, but you can then, when you're done with the broth, you can strain it and you can put all that stuff in your compost.
A lot of the minerals will have gone into the broth.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
Then you take the fibers and you put them in the compost.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think we got it all?
We
I mean,
got
we
it
didn't
all.
get it all, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so much to say about composting, but our goal here was to show you guys how
We do it.
we do it, because it's like very approachable. And I would say, even though we're really into the science of growing plants, obviously it's what we do for a living, we don't take a very methodical or scientific approach to our composting. And I feel like that's a little bit of a takeaway, that it's like we understand
Yeah.
so much about soil and so much about how this works,
Yeah.
and then we've decided to compost like this. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if
I
it
love
was,
that
if
bumper
there was
sticker.
a payoff,
Compost happens.
yeah, that's fun.
Compost happens. We're gonna leave on that note.
Okay, so thank you for visiting our backyard with us. yeah, the next one is going to be about cover cropping, because I don't know how many of you all were watching the very first one we did, but as an example, we planted some cover crops, and I know it's crazy, but in 2 weeks, those cover crops will be 6 weeks old, which is technically the age at which you should cut them down. So that'll be here in no time, and we're going to like process them at the nursery with you guys watching. We're going to body crimp them with Chris's body. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.